Sagittarius. The end that frees you is always a promise, not a punishment. Dear Sagittarius, not every ending announces itself with a crash. Some slip in quietly, almost tenderly, like the moment you realize a once lively fire has turned to embers, and yet you still sit beside it, waiting for a flame that will not return. You tell yourself it's only a matter of time, that the warmth will find its way back to you, but deep down, you felt the shift, the laughter that no longer feels the same, the air in the room turning colder even when the windows are shut, and still you've stayed. Not because you don't recognize the truth, but because leaving feels like betraying what once gave you joy. You've kept silent, holding your breath, afraid that speaking your weariness aloud might make you seem ungrateful or weak or disloyal. But Sagittarius, the truth is this. Not every ending is a punishment. Some endings are promises, quiet oaths your soul made long before you could name them. Promises that said, "When the lesson is complete, I will guide you away." This is one of those endings. It is not here to take from you but to free you. It doesn't erase the beauty of what was. It simply closes a chapter that has taught you everything it could. What lies ahead is not exile but release. Not abandonment but the beginning of your next becoming. Stay here with me and let's walk into that space together. And if this speaks to the hidden places in your heart, share it, save it, let it ripple outward. Because someone else is waiting to remember that freedom was always theirs too. Gate 1. When endurance becomes habit. Sagittarius, you have always been resilient. It's one of the first things people notice about you. The way you can stand in storms that would have broken others, the way you keep moving even with the wind against your face. You've been the steady hand when everyone else trembled, the quiet strength that held things together when no one else knew how. But there is a shadow to this gift. An invisible thread that binds you to places and people long after they've stopped nurturing you. Because somewhere along the way you learned that endurance was a virtue. That staying meant loyalty. That to leave was to fail. It's an easy trap for a soul like yours. You tell yourself you're just giving it a little more time. That things might turn around, that patience will prove you right in the end. You convince yourself that holding on is an act of courage. And sometimes it is. But not always. There comes a point when patience stops being wisdom and starts being fear of change, fear of loss, fear of admitting that something you've poured yourself into will never give back in the way you've hoped. That's when endurance, your once sacred strength, becomes a habit that quietly drains you. I once knew a Sagittarius man named Adrian who stayed in a job he'd long outgrown. At first, his role challenged him, taught him, even lit him up. But over time, the spark faded. His contributions went unnoticed, his creativity unused, his spirit dulled by routine. Friends told him he deserved more, but Adrian waved them off. "I just need to get through this quarter," he'd say. "I just need to wait for the next promotion." But the promotion never came. Years passed, and with each year, his laughter grew quieter, his shoulders heavier. One day, he realized he had spent more energy enduring than actually living. His patience had become a cage, and he had built it himself. It's like tending a fire that went out long ago. You sit by the ashes, hands covered in cold soot, telling yourself the heat will return if you just wait long enough. But fires don't reignite themselves. They need new wood, new spark, new air. And sometimes the only way to find that warmth again is to walk away and build a fire somewhere else. Yet how often have you, Sagittarius, kept watch over a flame that has already died, believing that your loyalty alone could bring it back to life? The thing is, you are not just enduring circumstances, you are enduring the slow erosion of yourself. You shrink in small, almost imperceptible ways to make staying possible. You silence your instincts when they whisper that you're done here. You bury your restlessness under layers of rationalization. "I don't want to be impulsive. I owe it to them. It's not the right time." But what you're really saying is, "I'm afraid of what happens if I choose myself." Endurance can be noble when it protects something alive. But when the thing you're holding on to has already ended, when the relationship, the job, the dream no longer breathes, it stops being noble. It becomes a way to avoid the grief of letting go. And grief is the real reason we stay too long. We tell ourselves we can't leave yet because we're waiting for the perfect moment, but the truth is we're waiting for it to hurt less. We want the goodbye without the ache. But it doesn't work like that. Sagittarius, you are not meant to live in half light. You are not here to be the keeper of extinguished fires. Your soul thrives in movement, in growth, in risk. And yet, it is so easy to forget this when endurance feels like safety. Safety can be seductive. It wraps itself around you, whispering that at least you know what to expect here, that uncertainty is far more dangerous. But deep down, you already know the danger of staying. It's the slow suffocation of your joy, the dimming of your magic, the quiet resignation that this is just how things are now. Think of the last time you left something you had outgrown. Yes, there was fear, but there was also breath, like your lungs could finally fill again. There was space and light and possibility. That is what waits for you beyond the threshold of this habit. But you cannot reach it if your hands are still clinging to what's gone cold. You have been taught that quitting is weakness. Let me rewrite that for you. Quitting what no longer serves you is wisdom. It is discernment. It is an act of self-respect. You are not betraying anyone by leaving a situation that asks you to betray yourself. And if you have to choose between keeping a promise to someone else and keeping a promise to your own soul, choose your soul. Every time. Because here is the truth you may not want to hear. You can endure anything, Sagittarius. That's not the question. The real question is, should you? Gate 2. Realizing what's gone will not return. Sagittarius, one of the hardest truths to accept is that some things do not come back. Not because they were never real, but because they belong to a season that has already passed. The warmth you are waiting for did exist. The laughter, the closeness, the magic, they were all real. But they were tied to a time, a version of you, and a version of them that no longer exist in the same way. And the moment you try to revive it exactly as it was, you will feel the ache of pressing against something that has already moved on. This is not a failure. It's the nature of life. Everything changes, sometimes so slowly you barely notice, sometimes overnight. A friend once told me that the saddest part of growing is realizing that some chapters can't be reread. They fade when you try to return. And yet, we resist this truth. We linger, we try to recreate the old rituals, repeat the old jokes, chase the old feelings. But what we're chasing is a ghost of what was. A ghost that will never fully solidify in our hands. I once worked with a Sagittarius woman named Clara, who had been in a relationship for 7 years. The early years were electric. They traveled, laughed until their sides hurt, stayed up talking until dawn. But somewhere along the way, the air between them cooled. Conversations became shallow, intimacy became rare. Clara held on fiercely, convinced she could bring back what they once had. She planned trips, arranged surprise dates, recreated moments from their early days. But no matter what she did, it always felt thinner. One day, in tears, she said to me, "It's like wearing my favorite childhood shoes. They used to fit perfectly, but now they just hurt." That was the moment she realized. It wasn't that the love had never been real. It was that she had outgrown the version of it she was trying to wear. And Sagittarius, maybe that's you right now. Maybe you're sitting in a space that once fit you perfectly but now feels constricting. You keep adjusting yourself to make it work. Shrinking here, folding there. Until one day you notice you barely recognize your own shape. You are still you, but compressed, diminished, edited to fit a frame that no longer holds who you've become. We hold on because we hope it will come back. We think if we wait long enough, if we give enough, if we endure enough, the warmth will return. But some warmth belongs to a moment, not a lifetime. To stay after that moment has passed is to slowly transform into a smaller version of yourself just to fit into something you've outgrown. It's not just relationships. It can be friendships, careers, even dreams. A job that once inspired you might now feel like a cage. A dream you chased in your 20s might not match who you are in your 30s. But because you invested so much time, energy, love, you feel bound to it. You tell yourself you can't walk away without wasting everything you've given. Yet here is the truth you need to remember. Nothing you have lived is wasted. Every experience has shaped you, taught you, carved you into someone wiser, stronger, more awake. Walking away does not erase the value of what was. It simply acknowledges that its season is over. It's like holding autumn leaves in your hand, wishing them back onto the tree. You can admire their beauty, honor their meaning, but you cannot reattach them. Their purpose has already been served. And if you keep your eyes fixed on the fallen leaves, you'll miss the bare branches preparing for new buds. The most painful part of this realization is that it requires you to release the hope of return. You can still cherish the memories without making them your map. You can still love what was without forcing it to be what is. This doesn't mean forgetting. It means allowing both the beauty and the loss to exist side by side without demanding they change form for your comfort. Sagittarius, your spirit is too expansive to be contained by yesterday. If you are clinging to something in the hope that it will return to its former shape, ask yourself, what am I losing in the process of waiting? How much of myself am I setting aside for the sake of preserving what no longer grows with me? This is not about giving up too soon. This is about knowing the difference between persistence and self-erasure. There's a quiet power in saying, I love what this was, but I will not shrink to keep it. You are allowed to step out of the old frame and into the open air, even if you're not yet sure what will meet you there. Because here's the truth, what's meant for you will never require you to become less. And what's gone will not return in the way you remember. But life has a way of giving you new warmth, new laughter, new magic, if you're willing to let go of the old and open your hands to the next season. Gate 3, the promise of liberation. Sagittarius, long before this moment arrived, you made yourself a quiet promise. It may have been in the middle of a sleepless night, after a conversation that left you hollow, or on a day when you looked at your own reflection and barely recognized the person staring back. You told yourself, if I am ever here again, shrinking, silencing, settling, I will choose to leave. You promised you would not repeat the patterns that once drained you. You swore that you would not mistake endurance for love, nor call it loyalty to abandon yourself. This ending, the one you're standing in now, is the chance to keep that promise. I know it doesn't feel that way right now. It feels like loss, like failure, like stepping into an empty space with nothing to hold on to. There's a heaviness in your chest, a lump in your throat, and a part of you wonders if you've made a mistake. That's because endings, even the right ones, carry grief. But grief is not proof that you're wrong. It's proof that you cared. The ache is simply the echo of something that mattered. And alongside that ache, if you listen carefully, there is also something else. The faint but steady hum of relief. Relief is the soul's way of saying, thank you for remembering me. It is the lightness that arrives when you no longer have to bend yourself into shapes that hurt. It is the quiet ease that comes from not second-guessing every word, not guarding every thought, not walking on the eggshells of other people's comfort. Liberation is not always a dramatic escape. It is often a soft, steady return to yourself. I once knew a Sagittarius woman named Marin. She had spent years in a business partnership that began as a dream but had slowly turned toxic. Every meeting left her drained. Every decision was a battle, and her creative spark was smothered under endless compromise. But she stayed, telling herself she couldn't leave without betraying the vision they once shared. One day, she remembered the vow she'd made to herself after a previous chapter of burnout. I will never trade my peace for someone else's approval again. It was terrifying to honor that promise. Contracts had to be dissolved, finances restructured, friendships lost. But 3 months later, she told me, I wake up and my body feels different. Like my soul fits again. That is the promise of liberation, not that it will be painless, but that it will be worth it. The mind will try to convince you that staying is safer, that if you just hold on a little longer, things might shift. But deep inside, your spirit knows the truth. Staying would cost you more than leaving ever will. Every day you remain in a space that asks you to be less, you pay in joy and creativity, in the quiet confidence that comes from living aligned with your truth. Liberation is the moment you stop paying that price. In Buddhist teaching, there is a reminder that resonates here. Let go not because you have lost, but to make space for what is meant to arrive. The room you're leaving may look empty at first. You may even miss the clutter, the noise, the familiar weight of what once filled it. But emptiness is not absence, it is readiness. It is the open field where new things can take root. And yes, Sagittarius, there will be moments when you doubt. Nights when the silence feels heavier than the chaos you left. Days when you long for the comfort of the known, even if the known was hurting you. This is the in-between, the liminal space between the old life and the new. It is tempting to rush through it, to fill it with anything just to feel grounded again. But liberation asks for patience. It asks you to stay in the openness long enough for what's true to find you. Keeping your promise to yourself means trusting that the life ahead will meet you with the same devotion you are now showing yourself. It means believing that your worth is not tied to how long you can endure something that's over. It means allowing your endings to be sacred, not shameful. One day soon you will wake and notice something subtle. The air feels lighter. Your laughter is louder. Your thoughts flow without the constant hum of tension. You will realize that the heaviness you carried was never yours to keep. It belonged to a chapter you've now closed. And you'll see with crystal clarity that the ending you once feared was not a punishment, but the fulfillment of a promise you made to yourself long ago. That when the time came you would walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself more. That is liberation. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self-respect. Not a loss but a reclamation. And this time, Sagittarius, you keep the promise. Gate 4, turning sorrow into strength. Sagittarius, endings have a way of pulling you into two worlds at once. One part of you is already stepping toward the horizon, sensing the pull of something freer, something lighter. The other part is still turned back, eyes on the doorway you just left, remembering the warmth, the laughter, the pieces of yourself you gave away so willingly. This is where sorrow lives, in the space between what was and what will be. And it is tempting, so tempting, to confuse that sorrow for a sign you should turn back. But grief is not a call to return. It is the proof that you loved deeply, invested fully, lived entirely present in what once was. And that love, that presence, is not wasted simply because the chapter has closed. I've seen many Sagittarians wrestle with this. They confuse moving on with erasing the past, as if letting go dishonors the beauty of what was. But releasing what no longer fits is not betrayal. It's integrity. It's the ability to say, I can honor the memory without living inside it. This is where sorrow becomes strength. Not by pretending the pain doesn't exist, but by letting it become part of your story without letting it define your future. I remember a Sagittarius man named Theo who left a long-term friendship that had quietly turned into a cycle of resentment. They had been inseparable for years, bound by shared history and countless adventures. But slowly, the friendship became one-sided, full of unspoken expectations and small betrayals. When Theo finally walked away, he was devastated. For weeks, he questioned himself, replayed old conversations, wondered if he had been too harsh. But in our conversations, I saw the shift, first in his words, then in his energy. He began to speak about his own needs with clarity. He stopped apologizing for wanting reciprocity. The grief had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a weight, it was a compass. That's the power you hold now, Sagittarius. You can choose to carry this sorrow like an anchor, or let it become wind in your sails. The tears you shed are proof that your heart is alive, that it still beats with courage enough to love again. Each moment you sit with the ache instead of running from it, you are building a new kind of resilience. Not the endurance that keeps you stuck, but the strength that moves you forward. It is easy to romanticize the past, to remember only the sweetness and blur out the pain. Memory has a way of softening the edges, and in the softness you might feel tempted to believe that going back would fix everything. But this is where truth must be louder than longing. The reality is, if you were to return, you would find the same cracks, the same compromises, the same silencing of yourself. Because the version of you that stayed then no longer exists. You have outgrown the walls you once called home. Strength in this moment is not about moving on quickly or pretending you're fine. It's about choosing to live fully in the present, even as you carry the weight of what you've lost. It's about finding ways to honor your grief without letting it keep you from what's next. It's about trusting that the same heart that survived this ending will also recognize the beginning when it comes. Think of a sailor anchored at a familiar island. It's safe, it's known, it has memories etched into every shoreline. But if he never pulls up the anchor, he will never discover the other lands waiting for him. The sea does not promise smooth waters, but it does promise new horizons. And you, Sagittarius, are a traveler at heart. Your soul was never meant to stay moored forever. So let the sorrow move through you. Let it teach you where your boundaries are, what kind of love you will accept, what kind of life you will no longer compromise for. Let it remind you that your worth is not in how long you can hold on, but in how bravely you can let go when the holding on costs you yourself. One day you will look back at this moment and see it differently. The tears will still matter, but they will no longer sting. The memories will still be vivid, but they will no longer chain you. Instead, they will be like a constellation in your sky, a reminder of where you've been, guiding you toward where you're going. This is how sorrow becomes strength, not by erasing the ache, but by allowing it to shape you into someone who knows without doubt that they can survive the leaving, carry the love, and still move toward the light. Conclusion: you were never being left, you were being set free. Sagittarius, you have now walked with me through the landscapes of your endurance, your realizations, your promises, and your transformation. And maybe as you've listened, you've begun to see your own story reflected here. The moments you stayed too long, the spaces you outgrew, the quiet vows you made to yourself, the ache of endings that were also beginnings. I want you to know this: you were never being abandoned. You were being set free. This ending, no matter how heavy it feels in your chest, does not erase the beauty of what was. It doesn't make you foolish for loving, for trying, for holding on as long as you did. All it means is that you've reached the part of the story where your soul has learned what it came here to learn. And now it's time to turn the page. Not because you have to, but because you're ready. You don't need to prove anything to anyone as you step forward. You don't have to explain your choice to those who cannot understand it. The road ahead will not ask you to apologize for choosing your own peace, your own joy, your own wholeness. It will only ask that you bring yourself, fully, unapologetically, and without the weight of old chapters you've already lived. So walk forward not as someone fleeing loss, but as someone graduating into the next, truer version of yourself. And if what we've shared here has stirred something in you, let it ripple out into the world. Like, share, subscribe, not for me, but for the others standing at their own threshold, waiting for the reminder that freedom was always theirs to claim. You are not leaving home, Sagittarius. You are finally coming back to it.